Hi there, I'm Renos Vakis, lead economist at the World Bank, and your host for Accelerating Development Ideas for Impact. This is not your typical podcast. It's an AI powered conversation brought to you by the World Bank Institute for Economic Development, where we unpack the latest research with one goal in mind, turning big ideas into real world impact. Let's get started.
Thank you for the introduction, Renos. Let me start with a scene. Imagine a senior manager in a government agency sitting in a routine staff meeting. On the screen in front of him are the results of an anonymous employee survey. As he reads through the comments, he begins to notice patterns he had never seen before, where communication was breaking down, where staff felt unsupported, and where his team was struggling. The information had been there all along. For the first time, he could see his organization through the eyes of the people working in it.
And that story captures the central idea behind today's discussion, based on insights from the Government Analytics Handbook. Governments collect enormous amounts of information every day. The question is, how can they use that information to become more effective? Welcome to the first episode of our new series based on the overview chapters of the handbook.
It's a concept called government analytics. And it seems so obvious, but the handbook points out a huge disconnect. The private sector has created trillions of dollars in value with analytics, but governments have been slow to turn that same lens on themselves.
Exactly. Think about it. Around 154 economies have established digital government institutions. They have invested heavily in digitization. Yet, very few have systematized the use of those digital records to actually strengthen how they work.
So we have all this data sitting in servers, but it's not being used to diagnose the real problems inside specific teams or organizations. For many of our listeners in the public sector, this probably sounds very familiar.
It is a massive, massive missed opportunity. But this is also where things get exciting. This is not about proposing expensive, top-down reforms that often fail. It is about using the data that is already there.
Okay, so let's get into the first big takeaway. What happens when governments do start using this data?
The performance gains can be enormous, and they can happen quickly. The economic case is just staggering.
Staggering how? Give me an example.
Okay, in the Russian Federation, analysis showed that just improving the performance of the bottom quarter of public procurement agents could save around 10 billion US dollars every single year.
10 billion? What does that even mean in practical terms?
It is equivalent to 15% of the country's entire public health spending. The money is right there, waiting to be saved, just by managing smarter.
Wow, okay, that's huge. And it's not just about savings, right? The outline mentioned revenue too.
Yes, in Pakistan, a study found that offering the best performing tax collectors their top choice of job posting had the potential to increase tax revenue by 40%.
40%? Just by using a non-financial incentive to motivate people?
Precisely. Or look at service delivery. In Italy, data showed some social security offices take 2.5 times as long as others to process similar cases. Just reassigning the best managers to the largest offices could boost productivity by 7%.
That makes sense. It's not just about numbers, it's about people. In Nigeria, for instance, the quality of management was directly linked to whether a road or a school actually got built.
Yes, better management could raise the likelihood of a project being completed by 32%. And sometimes the findings can avert a crisis.
You're talking about the Brazil example, right?
I am. Analysts there modeled the future payroll and pensions for every single federal employee. The projections showed a looming fiscal catastrophe. The most expensive scenario would cost almost 50% more than the least expensive.
So that hard data gave the government the evidence it needed to go and negotiate tough legislative changes before it was too late.
It gave them a map of the future. The same thing happened in Nigeria after $18 billion in debt relief. Analytics were used to track every single naira. The system found that one ministry had received $475 million but had not completed a single project.
That's unbelievable. But finding that out allowed them to create new, more effective ways to spend the money.
Exactly. It replaces suspicion with evidence.
Okay, so the potential is clearly there. But this is where it gets tricky, I imagine. How does a government actually build this capacity? It sounds great in a report, but what's the roadmap?
And this is the second key takeaway. There is a very practical framework for this. It starts with a simple model called the Public Administration Production Function.
That sounds, very academic.
It does, but the idea is simple. Think of it like a recipe. You have your inputs, your people, your goods, your capital. Then you have your processes, the management practices, the culture. And those produce your outputs and outcomes, the services you deliver.
I see. So you just map the data you have onto that simple recipe.
You do. For inputs, you analyze payroll data to see if your wage bill is sustainable or procurement data to spot overpriced goods. For processes, the things you cannot see in administrative data, you use surveys of public servants to measure leadership and motivation.
Right, like in that story about the senior manager.
Precisely. And for outputs, you use administrative case data to see how many tax returns an officer processes, and you use citizen surveys to measure public satisfaction.
Okay, the framework makes sense. But who actually does all of this work? An analyst in a basement office?
No, this has to be a strategic, system-wide approach. The first step is to build analytics units, both at the center of government for a big picture view and within each major agency to tailor the analysis.
And I imagine technology isn't enough. You need the right people.
This is the most critical part. You must develop a core of public managers who can interpret this data and combine it with their real-world knowledge. Many of our audience members who work as managers know that data alone is never the full story.
So it's about building a culture, not just a dashboard.
A culture, yes. And that culture has to be driven by analytics agendas at every level, from the top leader to the unit supervisor. Finally, and this is difficult for government, you must create a culture that rewards smart experimentation even when an experiment fails.
That requires a lot of trust, taking responsibility for the failures that are a natural part of innovating.
It does, but the payoff is immense. This is about moving from what one chapter calls the procedural fog of government to a place of focus. It is about turning existing records into a clear map that shows where an administration is succeeding and, just as importantly, where it is failing. Ultimately, the choices policymakers make today about what they decide to measure will define what their governments can know and what they can achieve tomorrow. Building this capacity is not a short-term project. It is a fundamental, long-term investment in creating a more effective, a more efficient, and a more responsive state for everyone. Over to you, Renos.
Thank you for joining us. You can find the full report on our website. Just follow the link in the description. Be sure to subscribe to be the first to know about upcoming episodes. And before you go, how do you plan to put what you learn into practice? And what topics you'd like us to explore next? We'd love to know. Until then, goodbye.